Good morning, everyone. I'm John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republican Caucus, and I'd like to welcome you to our Republican media availability. With us today from the House of Representatives, we have House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury from the 31st District and Representative Chris Corey, Ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee from the 14th District. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th District and Senator Linda Wilson, Ranking Republican on the Senate Ways and Means Committee from the 17th District. With that, I will turn it over to House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury for some brief opening remarks.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I was just going to mention a couple things. The big news, since I think we all had one of these availabilities last week, is that the Democrats decided to hold hearings on 3 of the initiatives. So I think we're very glad to see that at least for those 3, they have sort of listened to what we have been saying all along, listened to the 400,000 people that signed each of those 3, and are going to hold a hearing. I think it's a little disappointing that they've announced they're not going to hold hearings on the other 3, although that just means that they will head to the ballot box and voters will get to have their say. And I think I have an opinion about where they're going to end up there. The other interesting wrinkle is Democrats seem to be coming out messaging about the Climate Commitment Act. There were a couple instances over the weekend when the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee posted some very misleading information and is essentially telegraphing that they want to hold the roads budget and maintenance and preservation hostage unless the voters reject the CCA repeal amendment. I think that's pretty unfair, pretty gutsy of a position to stake out. Not a dime of money in the CCA goes to maintenance and preservation of roads. So it would be a choice by the majority to defund projects that everybody needs, that provide good paying union jobs, that reduce commute times for our constituents, to get rid of those projects in order to fund elsewhere some of the projects that the CCA is funding would definitely be a choice, and I think one that would not be in the best interests of Washington. But it would not be a result of repealing the CCA. It would be a result of a conscious choice by majority Democrats. The other big budget news is that all 3 budgets have been released now. And for that reason, over on the House side, we have joining us Representative Chris Corey, who is the new ranking Republican member on the House Appropriations Committee. So I will turn it to Chris to talk about what is in and not in the House budget.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Chris Corey, 14th District. It's been an interesting road so far on the budgets. We've talked about it a lot. The state has record revenues, over $3 billion surplus over the 4-year. And just looking specifically at the House budget, what we've seen is kind of a move to continue to do what we've been doing for a while, which is spend it down. There is, at the end of the 4-year outlook, $80 million left over in our state's account, with some additional monies in reserve for about 5.9% in total reserves, well below the 10% recommended by the National Association of State Treasurers. So that's the biggest thing that stuck out to me, was that at the end of our 4-year outlook, we're going to be in a pretty scary place in terms of having savings for that rainy day. We had a economic revenue forecast that came out last week, and that shows that our state's revenues, while still up, are slowing, which could be an indication of things to come. As far as the budget goes, we're seeing a lot of money spread thin, rather than focusing on what I would consider are core issues facing Washingtonians. As Leader Stokesbury said, we've got a couple initiatives coming up, including the CCA, which has led to us having the 3rd highest gas prices in the nation. There is some acknowledgement of that failure with $150 million in energy rebates that are in both the House and Senate budget, showing it's been directly impacted. When you look at, let's see, what else do we have in there? You look at issues like home affordability. There's no addressing, any concerns there. There's nothing around the price of groceries. really what we're seeing is just a lot of money spread over a lot of different areas. So that's really concerning to us. We're going to offer, within the next week in the committee and then on the floor, some of our proposals that we think would really impact and help Washingtonians who are struggling to make ends meet while the state continues to collect record revenues. So those are some of the items that stand out. I don't know if I'm turning it over to Representative Stokesbury or Senator Braun.
I'll grab it from here. Thanks, Chris. John Braun, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to be pretty brief, and I'm going to just touch on a few things that Representative Stokesbury already touched on. When we talk about our priorities for the session, public safety, affordability, education, I think that we've said for a while the initiatives from the people to legislature lay down over these pretty well. And it's, I think, good news that the majorities have decided to hear three of them when it comes to public safety. Hearing the Pursuit Initiative is an important recognition that this is what the people of the state of Washington want, and that we are in bad shape when it comes to things related to public safety, whether it's the growth in homicide in our state or number one in retail theft, number two in car theft. This is the right step to hear it, and we hope that that will go from there to a full vote on the initiative and turning it into law. Affordability, not such good news. They've basically refused to hear the three tax initiatives that would allow more money to stay in the pockets of citizens around the state. Clearly, something that's popular across the political divide is undoing the damage done by the capital gains income tax, and worry about expansion of that if it's not undone. The cap and trade system, as Chris said, is the third highest fuel prices in the country as a result of that. It's hurting people in their pocketbook every day. And then the long-term care payroll tax, which is taking money out of folks' pocket and really doesn't deliver much. Even with the reforms envisioned in a couple pieces of legislature this year, it really doesn't deliver much. Less than half the people of the state of Washington would ever see a single penny, and those that do would be well below what they need to provide long-term care for themselves. So I think the refusal to hear these bills and ultimately bring them for a vote, and frankly demagogue about the problems with undoing them, is frankly elitism. It's the Democratic majority saying we know better what's good for the people of the state of Washington than the people of the state of Washington. I think that's fundamentally wrong-headed. They should be heard and get a chance to vote. If not, as Representative Stokesbury said, I think eventually the people will get a chance to vote, and I think we'll hear directly from the people what they want with their lives. And on education, I think back to good news, the agreement to hear the initiative that allows for more parental involvement and more parental rights relative to their children's education. Very popular with people of the state of Washington. I'm glad that we're hearing it, and I hope in that case it'll come to a vote. Last thing I'll say is just hit on a couple, important bills that we're trying, frankly, to stop here in the Senate. Now that we're here in House bills, the rent control bill, we stopped one in the Senate before. We're working to try and stop that again. That is not good for the people of the state of Washington. It will not lead to lower rents long term, and will not lead to more housing long term. It's a bad idea, and we get a lot of support, at least in our districts, for stopping that. The natural gas ban, which is not a natural gas ban now, but is still having there it removes the obligation to serve, and that again, all the studies show that drives costs for natural gas and for energy up to the people of the state of Washington. Bad thing for affordability. And then the last one I'll mention is this continued effort to use the unemployment insurance system to fund strikes by workers across the state. This is a wrong-headed idea. It's an idea that is not what our unemployment insurance system is designed for. We have a good, very good actually, unemployment system done in a bipartisan basis almost 2 decades ago now. It stood well through the severe tests of the pandemic, one of the few in the country to do so. And our result shouldn't be to put it loaded up with things that it was never intended for, and that is to pay for striking workers. I certainly acknowledge the right to folks to organize and to strike. But right now there's a balance to make sure as they negotiate a solution that they get a solution that serves both employers and the broader community and employees long term. And upsetting that balance with something like this is just a bad idea. I'm going to stop right there and thank you again for being here, and turn it over to Senator Wilson to talk about the Senate supplemental operating budget.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. So yeah, this is truly a supplemental budget, which is what assistant ranking member Chris Geldon and I went in to these negotiations with the understanding that that would be what we were aiming for, was the supplemental. It does address a host of public safety priorities, and at the same time, it's also maintaining essential services and then balancing again without new taxes. Happy about that. And this budget does address several areas that are important to our Republican caucus. Right now, it's a 1.8 billion increase in spending, but 2/3 of that is at maintenance level. It spends 275 million less than the governor's budget, and it leaves 4.3 billion at the end of the biennium in reserves, and at the end of the 4 years, it's still a $3 billion reserve, which is still $1 billion higher than the governor's budget. We have 2.3 billion in policy level caseloads, and basically those caseloads include the Healthcare Authority, where half of the 1.2 billion was disenrollment of Medicaid paid people that they're having to get off the rolls according to the feds, and that's expensive. So that's happening there. It's taking them longer to do it, so it's costing the state more money to do that. There was a couple of fines, the True Blood, like 100 million in True Blood and 100 million in another 10-year-old lawsuit that we had to pay for. And then there was 250 million that went toward transportation and special ed. So the special ed cap rates went up, and along with a little bit of the safety net. We had it does live within its means. It's especially good since the taxpayers right now are having trouble doing the same. It increases with inflation still increasing slowly. It's still high. It just means everything's going up a little slower. So fortunately for taxpayers, the fact that we didn't raise taxes and this is living within its means, that's a good sign for the people. There are things that we felt had to be addressed in this budget, and public safety is a high priority for our caucus, and we do have several areas in here that were addressed. So there's more money for the anti-drug task force, more corrections officer training, more money in the auto theft prevention task forces, crime victim and witness accounts for that money that's used by prosecutors, and then Washington State Patrol's major crime scene response teams, and more money for bolstering access to public defense, combating impaired driving, increasing penalties for property crime, and ways to deal with the sharp increase of the cannabis retail robberies. We have a public health crisis, so that's very important. We all know about the fentanyl overdose issue with all the deaths that are occurring with fentanyl. We have a money that goes toward a public service announcement over the airways, hopefully called One Pill Kills. It's educating those of the dangers of the fentanyl issues. We have a 20% opioid settlement going to the tribal programs to combat suicide prevention recovery services. This is the peoples that have been hurt most by the fentanyl issues in the state. Aside from our children. Education, we are addressing learning loss. There's you can't learn if you're not there, and there's addressing chronic absenteeism. Private school funding is good. We've got that up to $1,500 per. There's money from the feds that needed to come in to fill holes, and that has happened. So the charter schools have about $1,500 per pupil now. That's good. And special ed advocates that we were advocating for last year that didn't happen this year, or that did happen this year. We have criminal justice improvements, and then again, our Climate Commitment Act is spending $280 million versus the governor's $321 million. Many of the programs, I would say most of the programs, don't go into effect until January of 2025, anticipating the initiative. There is the largest spend in that is $150 million that will go to energy vouchers to those that are affected by this increase in cost of energy directly related to the Climate Commitment Act. So I think that's kind of an interesting statement, being there they're actually admitting that it's affecting the people. And that's basically about it. I think that's as many things I could get in a couple of minutes.
All right, with that, we'll go to questions. We'll start with Jerry Cornfield from Washington State Standard.
Good morning. Thank you. I just one simple question to start on the initiatives. I just want to be clear, Representative Stokesbury, Senator Braun, your caucuses are both prepared to deliver votes to pass those three initiatives if they reach the floor, correct? There's no problem with you folks approving those initiatives if they reach the floor?
Absolutely. You know, our entire caucus is yes on all 6 initiatives to the legislature.
Yeah, same for the House, Jerry.
Just want to be clear there. And second, on different issue, collective bargaining. Senator Braun and I think a couple other Republicans helped get it out of the Senate. It didn't have enough Democrat votes. I wonder, now that it's in the House, Representative Stokesbury, do you see your caucus providing votes to get it off the floor if necessary? If not, what issues do you have with the collective bargaining bill for legislative employees?
So excuse me, I've not seen what the Senate bill looks like that has made its way over. I think my 2 biggest concerns were the unionization at all of nonpartisan staff. They're incredibly valuable part of the work we do, and a huge part of that value comes from the ability of all members of all sorts of political allegiances, ideological outlooks, to be able to trust them. Excuse me. But you know, so I would be nervous about their unionization potentially undermining that deep level of trust that exists. The good news is I don't think that the person that, or the task force or whoever was sort of putting together an interim report on these issues recommended that nonpartisan staff be subject to collective bargaining. I don't think the House bill did that. I'm assuming the Senate bill does not either. The other concern I have is about keeping partisan staff, both Republican and Democrat, in the same bargaining unit as each other. Some of the work they do is very similar, but the goals of a lot of the work they do is somewhat different. And because of how inherently political the legislature is, I would have concerns about any union representing anybody from both sides of the aisle, because by definition, whichever caucus was in the majority would have a majority of their staff in the bargaining unit, who could then seek changes to the CBA that might be to the detriment of their minority colleagues. I don't think that's right or fair. I would think that if the bill passes, PERC and PERC recognizes the bargaining unit, it would make sense they recognize 2 separate units. When the bill went through the House Appropriations Committee, this issue was taken care of in a committee amendment. I don't know if it was taken care of in the Senate or not. I'm assuming it'll go through the same process, and if it's not in there, we'll keep talking about it. But those are the 2 biggest concerns for me, and I've yet to see exactly how they're addressed, if at all, in the Senate bill.
Yeah, Jerry, I just add, I think in addition to the comments that Representative Stokesbury made, the other things that were of high interest in the Senate were maintaining the legislative staff as at will employees, not subject to bargaining. I think that's pretty important for the integrity of the organization. And also, there was a lot of debate about overtime, and where we landed, I think, is a little bit awkward because it doesn't provide for nonpartisan staff to organize, which I think is the right answer. But then they don't deal with overtime, and then yet they're allowing legislative staff, partisan legislative staff, to organize and negotiate overtime. So we have some work to do on this bill to get it right. You know, I think most of us didn't think this was the right plan for our legislature, but that bill passed a few years ago. That ship has sailed now. If we're going to do this, we need to make sure we get it right. And there's a lot of details to work out.
Jerry, did you have anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, next we'll go to Claire Withicum of the Seattle Times.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to ask a few questions specifically about the long-term care initiative. I'm curious what you all make of the proposal to make the benefit portable, basically allowing people to retire in a different state and take the benefits with them as the re- sort of repeal effort is pending. Curious about kind of your take on that idea, but then also what you make of the argument that supporters of the program are saying that making the program entirely optional would effectively kill it. Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in there. I've said many times now that I don't think this is the right solution. It's a real problem. This is the wrong solution. There have been better options, including one proposed by Representative Stokesbury a few years ago that I think better fit the needs of the state. But if you're going to have this, what they're trying to do with the current bill, at least the one passed out of the Senate, is address the portability. It gets after the problem. It's sort of unworkable the way you have to maintain your records and report them manually. It seems like it's fraught with potential problems, either with misreporting or misunderstanding, and therefore perhaps ineligibility long-term for the benefits. Again, I'd go back to this is the wrong solution to a real problem. We ought to start over. And as far as being able to withdraw from the program, I think that's a key part of it. And unfortunately, the way this is designed, the system probably doesn't survive if everybody can withdraw, because most people will, because they recognize correctly that this isn't a program that's going to serve them very well.
I'll echo what Senator Braun said, and I think the very fact that the bill in the Senate this year exists, I think there was a similar bill introduced in the House. The very fact that this bill exists, I think, underscores the point that folks like Senator Braun and I have been trying to make, which is that this is just a wildly inappropriate function for the state to fill. We are a state government. We are not an insurer. We don't know anything about the insurance business. We can do our best, and we will constantly realize that we have fallen short if we're trying to replace the role of the private insurance market. And so the fact that we couldn't foresee the problems with portability when the Constitution guarantees anybody the right to travel between the states, move wherever they want, is something we should have seen coming. The legislature clearly didn't. It's now trying to address it years after the fact. But it just underscores how problematic the entire concept of a state-run plan is in the first place. I think what Republicans would favor is, I think a lot of us recognize that the private insurance market was broken. It does suffer from an adverse selection problem, and there is a role for the state to play, but not as the insurer. So I think what Republicans would really rally around is a program that made long-term care insurance coverage affordable for those who want it, but not mandatory for those who don't. Unfortunately, the current Long-Term Care Act, with or without the amendment being talked about this year, doesn't do that. And so I think the best solution is to wait for the initiative to go on the ballot. I suspect it will probably pass. But either way, I think we should be figuring out a way where the state can leverage its resources to help backstop the private insurance market to provide affordable coverage for those who want it, without mandating it for those who won't, and without the state trying to become an insurer and having to disentangle all of these complicated issues like portability on our own.
Yeah, and just one more thing I'd like to add. From an insurance standpoint, I got a pretty decent background in this market, and I'll tell you, if a private plan would have come to the state with all these restrictions, caveats, and rules, including a lack of portability, and tried to offer it in the state, the insurance commissioner would have shut it down, and rightly so. So if you're going to run an insurance business, you got to make sure that it's actually workable and follows the law. And so portability is probably at a bare minimum what this plan should have. But I agree overall. You're right. Portability probably will, or making it optional will make it, a pretty difficult scenario to continue on. But that just underlies the structural problems with the whole act to begin with.
And I think that off of what Representative Corey just said, we got to remember that this didn't pan out in the very beginning. It was underestimated by hundreds of thousands of people. They thought that there would be about 100,000 people joining this, and when it was closed, it was at 500,000 that actually opted out, and many more that wanted to, but the private insurance company closed and moved out of the state. So they had no options to be able to opt out and prove that they had the private insurance. So day one, this has been an issue. Day one, they've had a problem with the way they're funding this program. So this really isn't surprising how this is really slowly failing.
Claire, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to make sure I understand. Like the main issue, as you see it with the program, is both the cost to people paying into it and like the limited, like sort of lifetime benefit that people would get. Thank you.
That's right. I mean, it's a limited lifetime benefit, the portability, these are all issues that we've talked about for almost 5 years now, trying to point out that this is the wrong solution for a real problem. It doesn't, and I think Representative Corey nailed it. It is, if this was a private program, no one would accept it, least of all the insurance commissioner.
Yeah, I actually took the language from the Washington Cares website, stripped it of the state's name, and sent it off to the Office of the Insurance Commissioner and said, would this type of marketing be allowed and would this program be allowed in Washington State? They came back with an absolute no. And I said, well, it's Washington Cares. This is the program we're offering. And they said, oh, well, in that case, we were not written in to regulate it. So that is why we wouldn't be doing anything with that. So I think it just highlights the underlying issue with the whole program.
All right, next we'll go to Drew Mickelson at King 5.
Well, thanks for your time. So both of the proposed Democratic budgets did offer rebates, but there were some conditions. It looks like the House version would not issue the checks if the CCA was thrown out. I know your party's been asking for rebates. What do you think about these ideas and the contingency clause if that turns out to be the case here?
Well, I can speak to the House one, and I think it splits it up into two: one right before the election, and one right after. And I can let you draw your conclusions on the timing on those. But yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting thing to do, where it's like, we're going to give you part of this. We know you're impacted, but we'll give you some. I think that if you're going to acknowledge the problem, which there is, you need to give people the money back that they were adversely impacted. And so I would say we give it all out. And I think the Senate may have a little bit of a different approach to that.
The Senate does. It is a one-time $200 voucher for low-income people. There isn't it, and nothing's tied to the passage of the initiative or not.
I just add a couple things. One, while I certainly appreciate the effort to mitigate the impact to these families and individuals from the CCA, let's be candid about how much $200 is really going to help. All right, that's allow you to cover your extra fuel costs for a month, maybe two. What about the other 10 months of the year? So it's not much. And then I just, I think in the Representative Corey's being careful. I'll be less careful. I think there will be even-minded people out there that will look at the way the House has done this and think that looks a little bit like electioneering.
Yeah, I will echo that a little bit. We should do things because they're good policy. Probably one of the most fundamental rules of being in the legislature is that you're not supposed to use state resources to support or oppose election campaigns. We have got all sorts of ethics restrictions surrounding how we can discuss initiatives. We can discuss them for a little bit right now because we're in session and they're before the legislature. But after we sign and die, we can't use legislative resources to discuss them because they become public measures. That same logic sure makes it look awfully fishy to not just use state resources in terms of an email or a website domain, but to send hundreds of dollars to people right before and right after an election, where the second payment is based on how they vote in the election. That is really suspicious. I don't think a sign of good government. I sort of appreciate that the Democrats do recognize just how regressive the Climate Commitment Act is, and are willing to do this at all. But again, it just shows what Republicans have been saying since day one, that this is a regressive tax. It hits the lowest income Washingtonians the hardest. For a majority caucus that has spent the last decade complaining about how regressive our tax code is, for them to champion an enormous tax increase that is extremely regressive that they now have to go back and try to slightly unwind. They won't completely do it, like Senator Braun said, but slightly unwind the regressivity shows, I think, what an unfortunate policy this is. We have got to fix Washington, and taxing lower income people or making them pay higher fuel, electricity, natural gas prices is absolutely the wrong direction. We've got to change those things.
And I'd follow up with that. I'm hearing from constituents of mine, several constituents, where they, in particular, Northwest Natural has line itemed the additional cost of the Climate Commitment Act on their gas bills. And they're beside themselves. When you have a $400 gas bill and $131 of that gas bill is attributed to the Climate Commitment Act, that is substantial. And that is for what, 1 month of energy use. So the $200 is not going to be the panacea to fix this increase in energy prices. So I think we need to, people are realizing it. So we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing I forgot to mention, Drew, that the other concerning thing in the House version is it directs the Commerce Department to write the letter or statement. So that is very concerning that the legislature is not giving very precise, clear language that we've reviewed and approved. It's basically allowing, an executive agency to write the letter, and we don't know what that would look like. But again, to the whole point about electioneering, there's a good likelihood that becomes a very politically influential letter in how they write it, similar to, signing your name on a settlement check that gets sent out during an election year.
Do you have a follow-up, Drew?
Well, thank you.
Next, we'll go to John Stang. No.
You're on mute.
Sorry, John.
You
Can't hear you, unfortunately. Yeah. Sorry about that, John. Okay. There was a question that came in from Shauna Salisbury of McClatchy, and her question was, what are your general thoughts on the transportation budgets that were proposed?
Well, I would say I haven't really seen the House transportation budget, but I'm guessing they have the same challenges the Senate had. So I'm guessing there's some of the same issues. I would say they're given the very real and concerning challenges we have with paying for our transportation projects, and this comes from two sources. One is because the cost of these projects has risen dramatically, and we could talk about that, but I would say those increases are the result of overregulation in our state, and the fact that we're just not managing these projects well, and we're stacking them up, so we're not getting the level of bidders that we'd like to have, and therefore the bids are a lot, sometimes hundreds of % higher than we expected. So that's hurting us. And then we have a revenue issue because we've basically lived 3 decades on over reliance on a gas tax and heavy bonding. That gas tax wasn't working before with the advent of the cap and trade system, which has added 50 to 60 cents per gallon. It's working even less. That should have been no surprise to anyone. And by the way, there's a lot of folks saying, well, if we get rid of cap and trade, it'll destroy the transportation budget. That's nonsense. There's about $350 million to go from cap and trade into the transportation budget. That's a very small percentage. I know it's a big number, but it's a very small percentage of the transportation budget, and all of it is for pedestrian paths, hiking paths, multimodal, not roads and bridges. So where we have the problem is roads and bridges. CCA is not paying for any of that. It just isn't. By law, it's not paying for any of that. So we have a big problem. These transportation budget, at least the one in the Senate, recognizes that and tries to mitigate the impact. It tries to invest as much as possible in maintenance, and we have a tremendous maintenance backlog. We see that every day. You drive on I-5; it's unmistakable. we're still, among the highest in the nation, maybe the highest in the nation in potholes. So we got a lot of work to do in transportation, and these big budgets simply try to hold on. I don't think they do the best they can, but they don't address the big problems, which is how are we going to properly fund transportation long term. I'll say again, I've said many times before, but we need to do what most of the states in the country do, which is divert some of our operating funding to transportation, so we have a steady long term source that we can rely on to make steady investments in transportation and plan better for a better outcome for the drivers around our state.
I don't have a lot. I don't have a lot to add other than, I'll just reiterate my point from the top of this, which is, yes, the CCA would provide some money to the transportation budget. There is hardly any projects funded through the CCA using CCA dollars that I think are actually necessary that the majority of the state needs and would use. It is a lot of feel good things that don't get people from point A to point B any faster, which should be the focus of our transportation system. I have not looked through the transportation budget in detail. In fact, it is currently my laptop stand for this meeting, holding up my laptop, but it's right here on my desk, and it'll be the first thing I look over after this meeting. But I do know that our ranking member, Andrew Barkis, has been doing great work in the transportation committee, and encourage any folks with questions about transportation budget to talk to him offline as well.
Okay, and I was going to go back to John Stang, but it looks like he's dropped off. So with that, we'll just go to closing remarks, starting with House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury.
Well, I don't know how many more closing remarks I have. I think what you'll see from our caucus this week is a different vision for Washington's budget. When from the time I got elected 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, until today, the state operating budget has more than doubled. And in all my work out in my district in South King County and East Pierce County, I've yet to run into a constituent who has seen their family income double during that period of time. The budget growth has far outpaced the cost of inflation and population growth. It is far past time for the majority to have returned some of this budget largesse to the taxpayers in the form of broad-based tax relief. I think that the caucuses have very different priorities. Our caucus wants to do a lot of good to help a lot of people with targeted investments where we are studying what we're doing and making sure that the money is actually helping folks and improving lives and is not just being spread around like peanut butter to make ourselves feel better. And so I think you'll see some of those differences on display in committee and on the floor this week. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John to see if he has anything else as well.
Thanks, Drew. Just a couple things. I'll just reinforce. We're going to stay focused for the next, 2+ weeks on the same things we started on: public safety, affordability, education. We are fortunate to have 6 great initiatives from the people of the state of Washington to line up with these priorities. We're going to continue to push to get as many as we can heard and hopefully approved and turned into statute. And we're going to fight for bills that support these priorities and fight against bills that move us in the wrong direction. I appreciate your attendance this morning and look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again next week.